The smell of burning flesh still clung to Garrett Rourke's clothes 3 days after the border village attack, and he knew he should have turned back when the ash started falling like poisoned snow. But something made him press deeper into the ruined valley, where humans and orcs had slaughtered each other with equal savagery. He was a scout for the human militia, trained to find survivors and map the damage. Though in his 5 years doing this grim work, he had found precious few people worth saving, and far too many corpses that haunted his sleep. The valley spread before him in shades of gray and black, every tree reduced to charcoal, every structure collapsed into rubble, and the silence was so complete it felt like the world itself had stopped breathing. Garrett moved carefully through the devastation, his boots stirring up clouds of fine ash that settled on his dark hair and weathered face. He was 32 years old, lean and strong from years of frontier life, with thoughtful gray eyes that had seen too much death and hands that trembled slightly whenever he tried to sketch the maps his commanders required. He had grown up on a farm near the border, back when humans and orcs maintained an uneasy peace, before the raids started and hatred consumed both sides like wildfire through dry grass. Something moved in the wreckage ahead, just the faintest shift of shadow against shadow, and Garrett froze with his hand on the knife at his belt. Raiders from both species still prowled these dead zones, looking for salvage and survivors to kill, and he had learned that mercy was a luxury that got men buried in unmarked graves. But the movement came again, weaker this time, and he heard a sound that made his heart clench painfully in his chest. A baby was crying. The sound was thin and weak, barely audible over the wind that stirred the ashes into dancing spirals, but it was unmistakably the wail of an infant in distress. Garrett had heard that sound before, in other ruined villages, and it always meant the same thing. Someone too small to understand that crying drew predators, someone who would die without help, someone he could not save without risking his own neck. His commanders would tell him to note the location and move on. His training said that individual lives mattered less than intelligence that could prevent future attacks. His conscience, worn thin by too many hard choices, told him something different. He moved toward the sound, climbing over the collapsed wall of what had once been a longhouse. The structure had been built in the orcish style, with massive timber beams and a steeply pitched roof designed to shed snow, but fire cared nothing for craftsmanship and had reduced it all to blackened bones. The baby's crying grew louder as Garrett navigated the debris, and then he saw her. She was curled in what had once been a storage alcove, her body wrapped around the infant she protected, and for a moment Garrett thought she was dead. Ash covered her completely, turning her into a gray statue of desperation. But then she moved slightly, and he saw the rise and fall of her breathing. She was an orc, that much was obvious from her size and build, and the baby she sheltered was crying because it was hungry and cold despite her best efforts to keep it warm. "Do not come closer," she said, her voice hoarse from smoke inhalation but steady with determination. "I have a blade and I will use it." Garrett stopped moving and raised his empty hand slowly. "I am not here to hurt you. I heard the baby crying." "Humans never come to help," she said, and shifted enough that he could see her face through the ash. She was young, perhaps 25, with strong features and small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw. Her eyes were a startling amber color, bright with fever and pain, and her green skin was mottled with burns and cuts. Blood had dried in dark streaks down her arms. "You come to finish what your warriors started." "My warriors?" Garrett felt anger spark in his chest. "Lady, I do not know who attacked this place, but I am just a scout trying to make sense of the slaughter. I have no quarrel with you or your child." "He is my son," she said fiercely, adjusting her grip on the infant who continued to wail. "His name is Keth, and he is innocent of everything except being born into this cursed world. If you mean to kill him, you will have to go through me first." Garrett looked at her more carefully, noting the way she favored her left side, the unnatural angle of her right leg, the tremor in her hands that spoke of serious injury and blood loss. She was dying, he realized with a cold certainty that settled in his gut like a stone. Even if he walked away right now, she would be dead by nightfall, and the baby would follow soon after. The thought should not have bothered him as much as it did. He had seen dozens of orc corpses in his years as a scout, and told himself that they were the enemy, that they had killed humans just as brutally, that war made monsters of everyone. But looking at this young mother trying to protect her son with her last breath, Garrett could not make himself believe the comfortable lies anymore. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. She blinked at him, clearly surprised by the question. "Why do you care?" "Because if I am going to help you, I should know what to call you." "I am called Jorna," she said slowly, watching him with wary suspicion. "Jorna Brightaxe, though my clan is scattered and my family is dead, so the name means nothing anymore. I am Garrett Rourke, and I give you my word that I mean no harm to you or your son." He took a careful step forward, moving slowly so as not to startle her. "You are badly injured, Jorna. You need water and medicine and shelter. Let me help you." "Why?" The question was blunt, edged with pain and confusion. "Why would a human help an orc? Your kind has made it very clear what you think of us." Garrett thought about that for a long moment, searching for an answer that made sense. "Because I am tired of finding corpses. Because that baby did not choose to be born into a war. Because you are brave enough to die protecting him, and that deserves respect." He paused, then added quietly, "Because it is the right thing to do, even if nobody else thinks so." Jorna studied his face, looking for deception or cruelty, and Garrett made himself meet her eyes without flinching. Finally, she sagged back against the wall, her strength clearly failing. "I cannot walk," she admitted, the words coming hard. "My leg is broken and I have lost too much blood. Even if I trusted you, I cannot make it out of this place. Then I will carry you." Garrett moved closer, kneeling in the ash beside her. Up close he could see just how badly injured she was, and his heart sank. "Both of you. I have a camp half a day's walk from here with supplies and medicine. It is not much, but it is better than dying in these ruins." "You cannot carry us both that far," Jorna said, but there was desperate hope creeping into her voice. "I am too heavy and you are only human. I am stronger than I look, and I have hauled bigger burdens through worse terrain." That was not entirely true, but Garrett would figure something out. He had to. "Please, Jorna, let me help you. Let me get you and Keth to safety." She looked down at her son, who had stopped crying and was making small, pitiful mewling sounds. The baby was maybe 3 months old, with dark green skin and tiny tusks just beginning to emerge. His eyes were squeezed shut against the harsh world he had been born into, and he was far too thin. "He is so hungry," Jorna whispered. "I have not been able to feed him properly for 2 days. My milk is drying up from the fever and stress." "I have goat's milk at my camp," Garrett said, "and clean water and blankets. We can get him fed and warm, but we need to move now before it gets dark. Can you trust me that much?" Jorna closed her eyes for a long moment, and Garrett could see the calculation happening behind her fevered expression. She was weighing survival against risk, hope against experience, and he knew that whatever decision she made would haunt both of them. Finally, she opened her eyes and nodded once, sharp and decisive. "If you betray us, if you harm my son, I will kill you even if it is the last thing I do." "Understood." Garrett moved carefully, assessing the situation. Jorna's right leg was definitely broken below the knee, and she had deep burns across her back and shoulders. The fact that she was still conscious was a testament to orcish toughness, but she would not last much longer without treatment. I am going to need to splint that leg before we move you. It is going to hurt. Everything hurts, Jorna said flatly. Do what you must. Garrett worked quickly, using debris from the ruined longhouse to create a makeshift splint and strips torn from his own shirt to bind it in place. Jorna bit down on her sleeve to muffle her cries as he straightened the broken limb, and the baby started wailing again at the sound of his mother's distress. When the splint was secure, Garrett fashioned a sling from more fabric and helped Jorna settle Keth against her chest, where he could hear her heartbeat and feel some measure of safety. This is going to be hard, Garrett warned her. I need to get you on my back so I can carry you. It will jostle your injuries. I have survived worse, Jorna said, though her voice shook slightly. I survived watching my village burn and my family die. I survived 3 days in this hell keeping Keth alive. I can survive being carried by a strange human who claims to have a conscience. The process of getting Jorna onto Garrett's back was excruciating for both of them. She was indeed heavy, not from fat but from the dense muscle and bone that made orcs such formidable warriors, and Garrett had to brace himself carefully to take her weight without collapsing. Jorna wrapped her arms around his shoulders, cradling Keth between their bodies, and Garrett hooked his arms under her thighs to support her broken leg. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said honestly, "but we have no choice." Garrett stood slowly, his legs trembling with the effort, and started walking. Each step was an exercise in endurance, the weight on his back making his muscles scream and his spine compress, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. Behind them, the ruined valley stretched out like a vision of the end of the world, and ahead lay uncertain salvation and a choice that would change everything. The journey to Garrett's camp took far longer than he had estimated, partly because of the extra weight and partly because he had to stop frequently to rest and check on Jorna, who drifted in and out of consciousness as her body fought the fever. Keth cried periodically, a weak and thready sound that made Garrett's chest ache with sympathy, and by the time the sun started sinking toward the horizon his arms were numb and his legs felt like they were made of lead. "Still with me?" he asked during one of his rest stops, lowering himself carefully to the ground so Jorna could lean against a boulder. "Unfortunately," she murmured, her eyes glassy with pain. "Where are we?" "About an hour from my camp if I can keep this pace." Garrett rolled his shoulders, trying to work out some of the cramping. "How is Keth?" "Sleeping, finally. He is too weak to cry anymore." Jorna's voice broke slightly on the words. "Garrett, if he dies, I do not know what I will do." "He is not going to die," Garrett said firmly, though he had no way of knowing if that was true. "We are going to get him fed and warm, and you are going to rest and heal, and everything is going to be fine. You cannot promise that." "No, but I can damn well try to make it happen." Garrett stood up again, feeling every one of his 32 years. "Come on. The sooner we get there, the sooner we can take care of both of you." The camp was barely worthy of the name. Just a canvas lean-to stretched between trees and a small fire pit surrounded by stones. But it represented safety, and Garrett had never been so grateful to see it. He lowered Jorna carefully onto his bedroll, then immediately set about building up the fire and heating water. The goat's milk he had mentioned was actually condensed milk from his rations, mixed with boiled water to make it drinkable for an infant, and he prepared it with shaking hands while Jorna watched him with exhausted suspicion. "Here," he said, offering her the improvised bottle. "See if he will take this." Jorna took the bottle awkwardly, clearly unfamiliar with human methods of feeding babies, and held it to Keth's lips. For a terrible moment, the infant just lay there, too weak to respond, and then his tiny mouth latched onto the nipple and he started sucking desperately. Jorna made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and tears started running down her ash-stained face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Garrett Rourke. You have given my son a chance to live." "We are not out of danger yet," Garrett cautioned, though he could not help smiling at the sight of the baby feeding so enthusiastically. "Now let me look at your injuries properly. I have some medical supplies, nothing fancy, but enough to clean and bandage the worst of it." Jorna nodded, her attention still fixed on Keth, and allowed Garrett to examine her wounds. The burns were bad but not fatal, and he treated them with a salve made from comfrey and honey that his mother had taught him to make years ago. The broken leg worried him more, because if it did not set properly, she might never walk normally again. But there was nothing more he could do beyond keeping the splint tight and hoping for the best. By the time he finished wrapping clean bandages around the worst of the cuts, full night had fallen, and the fire cast dancing shadows across the small camp. "You should eat something," Garrett said, offering her hardtack and dried meat from his supplies. "You need to keep your strength up if you are going to produce milk for Keth." Jorna accepted the food mechanically, chewing without tasting, her eyes never leaving her son's face. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. "Truly, Garrett, what do you gain from saving us?" Garrett considered the question while he prepared his own meager meal. "Maybe nothing. Maybe a court-martial if my commanders find out I helped orcs instead of reporting their location. Maybe a knife in the back if your people think I kidnapped you." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. "But I spent 5 years walking through the aftermath of this war, counting bodies and drawing maps, and I am sick of it. Sick of the killing, sick of the hatred, sick of pretending that any of this makes sense. You and Keth, you are not my enemy. You are just people trying to survive in a world gone mad." "Your people would not agree with that assessment," Jorna said quietly. "To them, I am a monster, something to be hunted and killed. Some of them, yes, but not all. There are still humans who remember when the border was peaceful, when humans and orcs traded and talked instead of killing each other. I am one of those people." Garrett met her eyes across the fire. "My father was a farmer who sold grain to orc merchants. He always said they were fair dealers who kept their word. When the raid started, he tried to organize a peace council to talk things through before the violence got worse. He died for that effort, killed by human extremists who thought he was a traitor." Jorna's expression softened slightly. "I am sorry for your loss. My father died similarly, trying to prevent an orc war band from attacking a human village. They called him weak and killed him for his mercy. It seems our people are equally good at destroying those who seek peace." "Then maybe it is time someone proved them wrong," Garrett said. "Maybe it is time someone showed that humans and orcs can still help each other, even after everything that has happened." "You are an idealist," Jorna said, but there was no mockery in her tone. "A dangerous thing to be in times like these. Probably. But what is the alternative? Giving up and letting the hatred win?" Garrett shook his head. "I would rather be a dangerous idealist than a pragmatic monster." They fell silent after that, both too exhausted to continue the philosophical debate, and Garrett set up a watch schedule in his head. He would sleep for a few hours, then check on Jorna and Keth, then sleep again. It was not ideal, but nothing about this situation was ideal. He had committed himself to keeping these two alive, and he would do whatever it took to honor that vow, even if it cost him everything. The first week was the hardest, a constant battle against infection and fever and despair. Jorna's injuries slowly began to heal under Garrett's careful ministrations, but she remained weak and feverish. drifting in and out of consciousness while her body fought to recover. Keth, mercifully, responded well to the goat's milk and began to put on weight, though he remained far too thin and cried often during the night. Garrett found himself settling into a routine of nursing and feeding and cleaning, tasks he had never expected to perform for anyone, least of all an orc mother and child. "You are surprisingly good at this," Jorna observed one morning, watching him change Keth's makeshift diaper with practiced efficiency. "Have you cared for babies before?" "I have 6 younger siblings," Garrett admitted. "Well, the war took 3 of them. But I remember helping my mother when they were small. She used to say that a man who could not care for the helpless was not much of a man at all. Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was. She died of fever 2 winters ago, before she could see how bad things got." Garrett finished securing the diaper and lifted Keth carefully, supporting the baby's head. "Sometimes I am glad she is not here to see what we have become." Jorna was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Keth's father died in the attack that destroyed our village. He was a warrior, strong and brave, and he died defending children who were not even his own. I like to think he would be proud that I survived, that I kept our son alive no matter what it cost." "I am sure he would be," Garrett said gently. "You are incredibly strong, Jorna. Most people would have given up. Orcs do not give up easily. It is both our greatest strength and our greatest weakness." She shifted carefully, testing her healing leg. "How long will we stay here?" "As long as we need to," Garrett said. "At least until you can walk again. After that, we will figure out where to go." "Where can we go?" Jorna's voice was bitter. "My clan is scattered or dead. I cannot return to orc lands without protection, and I certainly cannot stay in human territory. We are homeless, Garrett, refugees with nowhere to run." Garrett had been thinking about this problem constantly, turning it over in his mind during the long watches of the night. "I have family land, about 2 weeks north of here. My father's farm has been abandoned since he died, but the house should still be standing. It is remote, far from any major settlements. We could go there, at least for a while. Give you time to heal and figure out what comes next." Jorna stared at him. "You would take us to your family home. Garrett, if anyone found out you were harboring orcs, you would be executed as a traitor." "Only if they found out. And the farm is isolated enough that we might be able to avoid attention." He knew it was a huge risk, possibly a suicidal one, but the alternative was leaving Jorna and Keth to die in the wilderness. "Besides, I am due to report back to my unit in 3 weeks. If I do not show up, they will assume I died in the field. It happens often enough that they will not investigate too closely. I could just disappear, start over somewhere new." "You would give up your entire life for us?" Jorna looked genuinely shocked. "Garrett, we are nothing to you. Strangers you found in the ruins. You do not owe us this much." "Maybe not," Garrett agreed. "But I made a vow to get you both home alive. I intend to keep it." Over the following days, as Jorna's strength gradually returned and Keth grew steadily stronger, Garrett began preparing for the journey north. He scouted the surrounding area for threats, traded with a few isolated homesteaders for additional supplies, and carefully destroyed any evidence that might lead his former comrades to the camp. It felt strange to be actively deserting, to be choosing personal conviction over duty, but every time he looked at Jorna and Keth he knew he was making the right choice. "Tell me about your family," Jorna said one evening, as they sat by the fire watching Keth sleep in a nest of blankets. "What were they like?" Garrett smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "Loud, chaotic, full of love and laughter, at least before the war. My mother sang constantly while she worked, old farming songs that had been passed down for generations. My father was quieter, but he had a dry sense of humor that caught you off guard. My siblings were typical children, always getting into trouble and needing rescuing. You miss them. Every day. Garrett poked at the fire. What about your family? What were they like? Jorna's expression grew distant. My mother was a weaver, famous throughout our region for her tapestries. She could take colored threads and create images so lifelike you would swear they could step out of the fabric. My father was a warrior, but a thoughtful one, who believed that strength should be used to protect rather than conquer. I had 2 brothers and a sister, all of them braver and stronger than I ever was. You survived when they did not, Garrett pointed out gently. That takes its own kind of strength. Or maybe I was just lucky or cowardly. Jorna's voice was thick with guilt. I hid when the attack came, thinking only of protecting Keth. I did not fight. I did not try to save anyone else. I just hid in the rubble like a frightened child. You did exactly what you should have done, Garrett said firmly. You protected your baby. There is no shame in that, Jorna. If you had tried to fight, you both would have died. Instead, you survived, and now Keth has a chance at a future. That matters more than false heroics. You are very kind, Garrett Rourke, Jorna said softly. Kinder than I deserve. You deserve kindness, Garrett said. Everyone does. The conversation left Garrett thinking about the nature of kindness and survival, about the impossible choices war forced on ordinary people. He had been taught to think of orcs as enemies, as brutal savages who killed without mercy, but Jorna was nothing like that propaganda. She was thoughtful and brave, devoted to her son, capable of gentleness despite the trauma she had endured. The more time he spent with her, the more he realized how much humanity's hatred had been built on lies and fear. 3 weeks after finding Jorna in the ruins, Garrett declared her well enough to travel. Her leg had healed enough that she could walk with the aid of a crutch, and while she was still weak, she was strong enough to carry Keth in a sling and manage short distances. Garrett broke down the camp methodically, scattering the ashes and removing any trace that they had been there, and then they set out north toward his father's abandoned farm. The journey took longer than Garrett had estimated, partly because Jorna could not walk for long periods and partly because they had to avoid settlements and main roads. They traveled through forests and along game trails, keeping to the wilderness where they were less likely to encounter other humans. At night, they camped without fires when possible, huddling together for warmth, and Garrett found himself becoming acutely aware of Jorna as more than just a refugee he was helping. She was beautiful, he realized one night as he watched her singing softly to Keth under the stars. Not in the conventional human sense, but in her own way, with strong features and expressive eyes and a quiet dignity that made her compelling. Her green skin caught the starlight in interesting ways, and her small tusks gave her smile a unique character. More than her appearance, though, Garrett found himself drawn to her strength and determination, to the fierce love she showed her son and the cautious trust she was beginning to extend to him. "What are you thinking about?" Jorna asked, catching him staring. "Nothing important," Garrett said quickly, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. "Just planning tomorrow's route." "You are a terrible liar," Jorna said, but she was smiling slightly. "But I will not press you." They fell into a comfortable silence, and Garrett forced himself to focus on practical matters rather than the confusing feelings swirling in his chest. He could not afford to complicate this situation with attraction, not when their safety depended on clear thinking and careful planning. But as they continued north, he found it increasingly difficult to ignore the warmth he felt whenever Jorna laughed at one of his jokes, or the protectiveness that surged through him whenever she struggled with her injured leg, or the contentment he experienced during the quiet evenings when they sat together watching Keth play with small toys Garrett carved from wood. "You care for him," Jorna observed one afternoon, watching Garrett make silly faces to get Keth to laugh. "My son, I mean. You have grown attached." "He is hard not to like," Garrett said, feeling slightly defensive. "He is a good baby, happy despite everything he has been through." "He is lucky to have you," Jorna said quietly. "We both are. I do not know how I can ever repay what you have done for us, Garrett." "You do not need to repay anything," Garrett said. "Just get better and help me figure out how to run a farm that has been abandoned for years. That will be payment enough." But even as he said it, Garrett knew that his motivations had shifted from simple charity to something more complex. He was not helping Jorna and Keth out of duty anymore. He was helping them because he had come to care about them, because the thought of anything bad happening to either of them made his stomach clench with dread, because somewhere along the journey he had stopped seeing them as orcs and started seeing them as family. The realization should have frightened him, but instead it felt natural, like something that had been building since the moment he found Jorna in the ruins. When they finally reached Garrett's father's farm, the place was in worse shape than he had hoped, but better than he had feared. The house still stood, though the roof had several leaks and the windows were broken, and the fields had gone wild with weeds and volunteer crops. The barn had partially collapsed, and the well was clogged with debris, but the bones of the farm were solid and could be restored with time and effort. "This is your family home?" Jorna asked, looking around at the overgrown yard and neglected buildings. "It was once," Garrett said, feeling a complicated mix of nostalgia and grief. "My father built most of this with his own hands. He always said that a man's worth was measured by what he left behind for the next generation." "It is a good place," Jorna said carefully. "Peaceful. We could make a life here, I think." The casual use of "we" made Garrett's heart skip, but he tried not to read too much into it. "It will take a lot of work to make it livable again. But yes, I think we could be happy here." They spent the next several weeks cleaning and repairing, slowly transforming the abandoned farm back into a functioning homestead. Garrett patched the roof and replaced the broken windows, while Jorna, still limited by her healing leg, focused on indoor repairs and organizing their meager supplies. Keth grew stronger every day, learning to sit up on his own and babble in the nonsense language of infants, and his laughter became the soundtrack to their labor. "I never imagined I would be a farmer," Jorna said one evening as they surveyed the partially cleared field. "I always thought I would be a weaver like my mother, creating beautiful things." "You could still weave," Garrett pointed out. "There is a loom in the attic, my mother's. I do not know if it still works, but you could try to restore it." Jorna's eyes lit up with genuine excitement, the first time Garrett had seen her look truly happy. "Really? You would let me use your mother's loom?" "She would have wanted it to be used," Garrett said simply. "Tools and talents should not go to waste." Over the following months, a pattern emerged. Garrett worked the fields, planting late-season crops and repairing fences, while Jorna restored the loom and began weaving again, creating beautiful cloth that she insisted was not good enough but which Garrett thought was extraordinary. Keth continued to grow, hitting new milestones that Jorna celebrated with fierce pride, and Garrett found himself falling into the rhythms of family life in a way he had never experienced before. But beneath the peaceful surface, tension simmered. They were living a lie, pretending to be something they were not, and both of them knew that discovery could come at any moment. Garrett had to make occasional trips to the nearest town for supplies, and each time he invented new stories about the wife and child waiting at home, carefully avoiding any details that might invite curiosity. The isolation that made the farm a safe haven also made it lonely, cutting them off from community and support. "You ever regret this?" Jorna asked one night, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the summer darkness. "Giving up your old life, hiding away here with us?" Garrett considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss having friends or being able to walk into a tavern without worrying about what I might accidentally reveal. But regret? No. I do not regret saving you and Keth. I do not regret choosing to do the right thing, even if it is hard." "You are a better person than most," Jorna said softly. "Human or orc." "I am just a man trying to make sense of a senseless situation," Garrett replied. "Same as you." As the summer deepened into autumn, Garrett began to notice changes in how he felt around Jorna. The protective affection he had felt from the beginning had evolved into something deeper and more complicated, something that made his pulse quicken when she smiled at him, and made him acutely aware of her presence even when they were working in separate parts of the farm. He found himself looking for excuses to be near her, to help her with tasks she could easily handle herself, to hear her laugh or see the way her eyes crinkled when she was amused. He was falling in love with her. He realized one crisp October morning as he watched her teaching Keth to walk in the yard. The knowledge settled over him like a heavy cloak, simultaneously wonderful and terrifying. Loving an orc was not just taboo, it was dangerous, potentially fatal for both of them if the wrong people found out. And yet he could not help how he felt, could not stop his heart from racing when she was near or his thoughts from drifting to her during the long hours of farm work. "Garrett." Jorna's voice pulled him from his reverie. "Are you well? You have been staring into space for several minutes." "Sorry," Garrett said quickly. "Just thinking about winter preparations. We need to lay in more firewood and check the root cellar." It was a transparent deflection, and they both knew it, but Jorna did not press him. Instead, she gave him a long, searching look that made him wonder if she could read his thoughts, then turned back to Keth with a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The first snow came in early November, transforming the farm into a winter wonderland and effectively cutting them off from the outside world. Garrett had prepared as well as he could, stockpiling food and fuel and making sure the house was properly insulated. But the isolation took on a new intensity when they were trapped indoors by blizzards and bitter cold. They spent long evenings by the fire, Garrett carving toys and tools while Jorna wove at the restored loom, and Keth played on a blanket between them, growing more active and curious every day. "He will walk soon," Jorna said one evening, watching her son pull himself up on the furniture. "And then we will have to watch him constantly. He will get into everything." "I am looking forward to it," Garrett said honestly. "He is a wonderful child, Jorna. You have done an amazing job raising him." "We have done an amazing job," Jorna corrected gently. "You are as much his parent as I am, Garrett. He calls you Da now. Have you noticed?" Garrett had noticed, and it filled him with a bittersweet joy he did not quite know how to process. "I do not want to overstep," he said carefully. "He is your son, Jorna. I am just someone who is helping." "You are more than that, and you know it," Jorna said, setting down her shuttle and turning to face him fully. "Garrett, we need to talk about what this is, what we are." Garrett's heart started pounding. "What do you mean? Do not play dumb with me," Jorna said, but her voice was gentle. "I see how you look at me. I feel how the air changes when we are close, and I need to know if I am imagining it or if you feel what I feel." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Garrett could deny it, could retreat into safety and pretend that he felt nothing beyond friendly concern. But he had spent too many years living with regrets, and he was suddenly, fiercely determined not to add this to the list. "I love you," he said simply. "I do not know when it happened or how, but somewhere between finding you in the ruins and now, I fell completely in love with you, both of you." Jorna's expression softened into something radiant and vulnerable. I love you too, she whispered. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was impossible, that I was just confusing gratitude with affection. But it is not gratitude, Garrett. It is love. Real, terrifying, inconvenient love. Garrett stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her and taking her hands in his. It does not have to be terrifying, he said quietly. We are already living together, already raising Keth together. This just makes it official. Official? Jorna laughed shakily. Garrett, we cannot marry. No human priest would perform the ceremony, and no orc shaman would accept it either. The world will not allow what we want. Then the world can go hang, Garrett said fiercely. I do not care about priests or shamans or what anyone else thinks. I care about you and Keth and making a life together. We can have our own ceremony, make our own vows. It will mean just as much. Jorna leaned forward, resting her forehead against his, and they stayed that way for a long moment, breathing in sync, hearts beating in time. Then she kissed him, soft and tentative, and Garrett kissed her back with all the pent-up longing he had been suppressing for months. It was not a perfect kiss, too awkward and uncertain, but it was real and full of promise. We are insane, Jorna murmured against his lips. This will only end in heartbreak. Maybe, Garrett agreed, but I would rather have a short time with you than a long life without you. They were married 3 days later, in a private ceremony of their own devising that borrowed elements from both human and orcish traditions. Garrett spoke the vows his father had taught him, promising to love and protect and cherish until death parted them, while Jorna braided their hair together in the orcish style and swore to stand beside him through all hardships. Keth served as their only witness, clapping his chubby hands in delight at the solemn atmosphere, and when they sealed the vows with a kiss, it felt more binding than any official ceremony could have been. The winter passed in a haze of quiet contentment, the three of them creating a family unit that defied convention but worked beautifully nonetheless. Garrett taught Jorna to read and write in the human script, while she taught him orcish battle songs and weaving techniques. They took turns caring for Keth, who had indeed started walking and proved to be as energetic and curious as they had feared, and they carved out moments of intimacy in the quiet hours after he fell asleep. I never thought I could be this happy, Jorna confessed one night, as they lay together in the bed that had once belonged to Garrett's parents. After everything that happened, after losing everyone, I thought joy was something I would never feel again. Neither did I, Garrett admitted. I thought I was broken, that the war had killed whatever part of me was capable of love, but you proved me wrong. We proved each other wrong, Jorna said, lacing her fingers through his. We are healing together. But even as they built their fragile happiness, the outside world intruded in small ways that reminded them of the danger they faced. In late winter, Garrett made a supply run to the nearest town and overheard conversations about increased patrols looking for orc survivors, about bounties being offered for information leading to their capture. He returned home pale and shaken, and Jorna read the fear in his eyes immediately. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough that we need to be more careful," Garrett said. "They are actively hunting any orcs who survive the border conflicts. If anyone finds out you are here, we are both dead." "Then we make sure no one finds out," Jorna said with determined calm. "We stay on the farm, we avoid drawing attention, and we protect our family." Spring arrived with a riot of color and new growth, and Garrett threw himself into farm work with renewed energy. The fields needed plowing and planting, the barn needed repairs, and the animals he had purchased from neighboring farms needed daily care. It was exhausting work, but it was also honest and satisfying in ways that his old life as a scout had never been. He was building something now, creating rather than documenting destruction, and that made all the difference. Jorna flourished as well, her weaving becoming increasingly sophisticated and beautiful. She started creating tapestries that told stories, orcish legends woven in colored thread, and Garrett hung them on the walls where they added warmth and character to the old farmhouse. Keth was walking confidently now, chattering in a mix of human and orcish words, and showing signs of his mother's artistic temperament in the way he played with colors and shapes. "He will be talented," Garrett said one afternoon, watching Keth arrange colored stones in complex patterns. "Like his mother. He has your stubbornness, though," Jorna teased, "and your tendency to stare into space when you are thinking too hard." "I do not stare into space. You absolutely do. You get this look on your face, very serious and distant, and I know you are 1,000 miles away in your head." Jorna moved closer, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "Where do you go in those moments?" "Nowhere important," Garrett said, but he was smiling. "Just thinking about how lucky I am, how impossible this all seems." "It is impossible," Jorna agreed, "and yet here we are." The peace shattered on a humid day in June when a group of human travelers stopped at the farm asking for water and directions. Garrett met them at the gate, carefully positioned so they could not see the house clearly, and provided the requested information with forced cheerfulness. But one of the men, a grizzled veteran with suspicious eyes, kept looking past Garrett toward the farmhouse. "You live alone out here?" the man asked. "Mostly," Garrett said, trying to sound casual. "It is my family's old place, quiet, but I like the solitude." "Saw smoke from 2 chimneys yesterday," another man said. "Seems like a lot of house to heat for one person." "The place is drafty," Garrett improvised. "Old construction, lots of gaps. I need extra fires to keep warm." The men exchanged glances, and Garrett felt his stomach drop. They did not believe him, or at least they were suspicious enough to remember him if questions were asked later. He provided their water in a rush and sent them on their way, then sprinted back to the house where Jorna was waiting with Keth in her arms. "We may have a problem," he said, explaining the encounter. "If they report seeing me, if someone decides to investigate, they will find you and Keth." "Then we prepare," Jorna said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We create a hiding place, somewhere I can take Keth if strangers come, and we have a plan for what to do if the worst happens." They spent the next week constructing a hidden room in the barn, accessible only through a concealed trapdoor, and stocking it with supplies that would allow Jorna and Keth to survive for several days if necessary. They rehearsed the plan obsessively, timing how quickly Jorna could get herself and Keth to safety, and Garrett taught her the local geography in case she needed to run. "I do not want to think about this," Jorna said one night, as they lay awake staring at the ceiling. "About you facing soldiers alone, about us being separated." "We will not be separated," Garrett promised. "If it comes to that, I will find you. No matter what happens, I will find you and we will figure something out." "You cannot promise that." "I can and I do." Garrett rolled over to face her, taking her hand and pressing it to his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. "I found you in the ruins when you were dying. I carried you to safety when it should have been impossible. I will always find you, Jorna. That is my vow." 2 weeks later, the soldiers came. Garrett saw them approaching from the fields where he was working, a squad of 6 men in militia uniforms moving with purpose toward the farmhouse. His blood turned to ice, but he forced himself to walk calmly toward them, intercepting them before they could reach the house where Jorna and Keth were hopefully already in hiding. "Can I help you?" he called out, wiping sweat from his forehead and trying to project harmless confusion. "Garrett Rourke?" the squad leader asked, consulting a piece of paper. "That is me. What is this about? We have reports that you deserted your post last year and have been living here in violation of militia code. We also have questions about possible harboring of enemy combatants." The squad leader's face was hard and unsympathetic. "We need to search the property." "There is nothing to find," Garrett said, his mind racing. "I did leave my post, I admit that. I was done with the war and I wanted to come home, but I am not harboring anyone, it is just me here." "Then you will not mind if we look around." Garrett knew he could not stop them without making things worse, so he stood aside and let them search, praying that Jorna had made it to the hiding place in time. The soldiers went through the house methodically, opening every door and checking every corner, and Garrett's heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. They found Jorna's weaving, the orcish tapestries on the walls, and the squad leader's expression turned even grimmer. "Where did you get these?" he demanded, pointing at the largest tapestry. "I traded for them," Garrett lied. "There is a merchant who comes through sometimes, sells orc crafts to collectors. I thought they were beautiful." "They are contraband," the squad leader said. "Possessing them is a crime." "I did not know that. I will get rid of them if that is what you want." The soldiers continued their search, moving to the barn, and Garrett felt sick with dread. The hidden room was well concealed, but if they were thorough enough they might find it. He followed them at a distance, trying not to look nervous, and watched as they poked through the stalls and storage areas. "What is this?" one soldier called out, and Garrett's heart stopped. He had found the trapdoor. Garrett moved without thinking, tackling the soldier before he could pull the door open, and chaos erupted. Fists flew and someone screamed, and Garrett fought with desperate strength born of fear and determination. But he was 1 against 6, and within moments they had him pinned to the ground with a blade at his throat. "Pull that door open," the squad leader ordered. "Please," Garrett gasped. "Please just listen to me for a moment." "You are a traitor," the squad leader spat. "You have been harboring orcs, probably feeding them information about our troop movements. You deserve to hang." "She is just a mother protecting her child," Garrett said desperately. "She is not a spy or a soldier. She is just trying to survive. Please, if you have any mercy at all, let them go." The trapdoor opened, and Jorna emerged with Keth in her arms, her head high despite the fear in her eyes. She looked at Garrett, held by soldiers with blood running from his nose, and her expression crumbled. "Let him go," she said clearly. "He did nothing wrong except show kindness." "I will come with you. I will confess to anything you want. Just do not hurt him." "Touching," the squad leader said coldly. "A monster defending her human pet." "She is not a monster," Garrett said fiercely. "She is my wife." The words fell into stunned silence. Every person present froze, staring at Garrett in disbelief and horror, and he knew he had just signed his own death warrant. But he could not take the words back, and he would not even if he could. Jorna was his wife, Keth was his son, and he would proclaim it to the world no matter what it cost. "You married an orc." The squad leader's voice was flat with disgust. "That is not just treason, Rourke. That is abomination. Call it what you want," Garrett said. "It does not change the truth. I love her and I married her, and nothing you do will make me regret that." The squad leader looked between Garrett and Jorna, his expression cycling through anger, disgust, and something that might have been uncertainty. "This is beyond my authority," he said finally. "We are taking all 3 of you in. The commanders can decide what to do with you." They were bound and loaded into a wagon, Jorna clutching Keth desperately while Garrett tried to reassure her with looks since words were forbidden. The journey to the regional garrison took 2 days, and with each mile Garrett felt his hope fading. They would be tried as traitors, he knew, and the punishment for that was death. Jorna would likely be executed as an enemy combatant, and Keth, innocent of everything, would probably be killed as well simply for being orc. The thought was unbearable. The garrison was a grim fortress of stone and wood, designed to withstand orc attacks, and they were thrown into separate cells that stank of mildew and despair. Garrett paced his small space frantically, trying to think of some way out, some argument that might save his family. But every possibility ran into the same wall. Humans and orcs were enemies, and no amount of personal conviction would change that political reality. On the third day, they were brought before a tribunal of senior officers, men whose faces were carved from stone and whose hearts seemed equally hard. Garrett stood with Jorna and Keth, the three of them together in the face of judgment, and he felt a strange calm settle over him. Whatever happened, at least they were together. At least he had tried. "Garrett Rourke, you stand accused of desertion, treason, and consorting with the enemy," the chief officer said, reading from an official document. "How do you plead?" "Guilty of desertion," Garrett said clearly. "Not guilty of treason. I have done nothing to harm humanity. I simply chose to save two innocent lives rather than let them die in the ruins of a war neither of them started." "The orc is not innocent," another officer said. "Her people have killed hundreds of humans. She is an enemy combatant." "She is a weaver and a mother," Garrett countered. "She has never hurt anyone. She was a civilian caught in a military attack, and she had the bad fortune to survive when everyone else died. And yet you married her in direct violation of every law and custom. You have betrayed your species, Rourke." "I married the woman I love," Garrett said. "If that is betrayal, then I am guilty. But I will not apologize for choosing love over hatred." The tribunal conferred in whispers, and Garrett tried to read their expressions for some hint of mercy. But military men were trained to hide their thoughts, and he could glean nothing from their closed faces. Finally, the chief officer spoke again. "Garrett Rourke, you are hereby stripped of your rank and citizenship. You are sentenced to exile beyond the human territories, never to return on pain of death. The orc female and her offspring will be released into your custody, on the understanding that if any of you are found within human lands again, you will be executed immediately." Garrett stared, unable to believe what he was hearing. "You are exiling us, not executing us." "The tribunal is not unanimous in its judgment," the chief officer said stiffly. "Some of us believe that your actions, while foolish and illegal, were not malicious. And there has been some discussion in the capital about peace initiatives, about the possibility of negotiating an end to the hostilities. Your case has become symbolic of those debates. Killing you would make you a martyr. Exiling you removes the problem without creating a rallying point for either side." It was not mercy, Garrett understood. It was politics, but he would take it because it meant his family would live. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling inadequate but sincere. "We will leave human lands and never return." They were given 3 days to prepare, supplied with a wagon and provisions, and a map showing the nearest neutral territories where humans and orcs did not actively hunt each other. Garrett used the time to gather everything he could from the farm, loading the wagon with tools and supplies in Jorna's loom, building the foundation for whatever new life awaited them. Jorna was quiet through all the preparations, her eyes distant, and Garrett worried that the trauma of capture and trial had broken something in her. "Talk to me," he said on their last night in the farmhouse. "Tell me what you are thinking." "I am thinking that you gave up everything for us," Jorna said softly. "Your home, your country, your entire life, and I do not know if I am worth that sacrifice." "You are worth everything," Garrett said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. "Jorna, listen to me. This is not a sacrifice. This is a choice, and I make it gladly. I would rather be exiled with you than comfortable without you. I would rather build a new life in a strange land than live in a world where we have to hide what we are." "You are the bravest man I have ever known," Jorna whispered. "Human or orc?" They left at dawn, the wagon creaking under the weight of their possessions, and Keth sitting between them on the bench seat babbling happily about the adventure. Garrett took one last look at the farm that had been his home, his sanctuary, his refuge, and then turned his face toward the unknown future. They traveled east, toward the borderlands where refugees and outcasts made their homes, and where rumors said that a new settlement was forming for those who wanted peace rather than war. The journey took 3 weeks, and it was hard in ways that had nothing to do with physical difficulty. Garrett was leaving behind everything familiar, every connection to his past, and stepping into a future he could not predict. But every time doubt crept in, he looked at Jorna and Keth and remembered why he was doing this. Love was worth any cost, any sacrifice, any hardship. They found the settlement in a valley sheltered by low mountains, a collection of rough buildings and tents that housed perhaps 50 families. Humans and orcs lived here in wary proximity, united by their desire for something better than endless war. And when Garrett and Jorna arrived, they were greeted with cautious welcome rather than hostility. "We heard about you," the settlement leader said, a grizzled human woman named Catherine who had lost most of her family to the fighting. "Word spreads fast about the human who married an orc and got exiled for it. You are either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," Garrett admitted. "But we are here now and we want to help build whatever this place becomes." "We need farmers," Catherine said bluntly, "and weavers, and people who are willing to work hard and mind their own business. Can you do that?" "We can," Jorna said, speaking up for the first time. "We want peace. We want a place where our son can grow up without learning to hate." Catherine studied them both, then nodded slowly. "All right. There is land available at the north end of the valley, near the stream. Build your homestead there and welcome to New Haven." New Haven. It was a presumptuous name, full of hope and idealism, but as Garrett looked around at the mixed community of humans and orcs working together, he thought maybe it was not so presumptuous after all. Maybe this was the beginning of something important, something that would prove that the two species could coexist if they tried. They built their new home slowly and carefully, a sturdy house that borrowed from both human and orcish architectural traditions, with wide windows that let in light and thick walls that kept out cold. Garrett worked his fields while Jorna set up her loom and began producing cloth that quickly became prized throughout the settlement. Keth grew and thrived, playing with other children who did not care whether their friends were human or orc, and learning that differences were interesting rather than threatening. Years passed, and New Haven grew from a struggling outpost into a thriving town. More refugees arrived, drawn by stories of a place where peace was possible, and gradually the old hatreds began to fade. It was not easy, and there were setbacks and conflicts, but the community persisted because enough people believed in the dream. On a clear autumn afternoon, 5 years after they had arrived in New Haven, Garrett stood on the porch of their home watching Keth play in the yard with his younger sister, a human orc child born of Garrett and Jorna's love. The baby had Garrett's gray eyes and Jorna's green skin, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "What are you thinking about?" Jorna asked, coming to stand beside him and slipping her hand into his. "How far we have come," Garrett said honestly. "How much has changed since I found you in those ruins. Do you ever regret it, choosing us over your old life?" "Never," Garrett said firmly. "You and Keth and Kessa, you are my life, my home, my everything. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Jorna leaned against him, and they stood together watching their children play. Two people from different worlds who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful from the ashes. The world still had its conflicts and its hatreds, but here in this valley there was hope, and that was enough. "I love you, Garrett Rourke," Jorna said softly. "I love you, Jorna Rourke," he replied, and kissed her as the sun set over New Haven, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Years later, when Keth was grown and had children of his own, he would tell them the story of how his human father found his orc mother in the ruins and vowed to get them both home alive. He would tell them about the journey through ash and danger, about the courage it took to choose love over hatred, and about the town that grew from those simple acts of defiance against a cruel world. And his children would listen wide-eyed, and then run out to play with their friends, human and orc together, living the peace their grandparents had fought so hard to create. The story became legend in New Haven, told and retold until it became part of the community's founding mythology. But for Garrett and Jorna, it was not legend. It was simply their life, the choice they had made and the family they had built, and they were grateful every single day for the chance to wake up together and work toward a better future. In the end, Garrett had kept his vow. He had gotten Jorna and Keth home alive, though home turned out to be somewhere neither of them had expected. But it was home nonetheless, full of love and laughter and the everyday miracles of family, and that was all that mattered. New Haven continued to flourish, becoming a beacon for those who believed that peace was possible between humans and orcs. Other mixed settlements sprang up, inspired by the town's success, and gradually the border conflicts began to cool as people realized there were alternatives to endless war. It was a slow process, measured in generations rather than years, but change was happening. Garrett and Jorna grew old together, their hair turning gray and their bodies showing the wear of hard lives and harder choices. But their love never wavered, never faded, and they remained devoted to each other until the very end. When Garrett finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, Jorna held his hand and whispered that she would see him again, that their love was strong enough to transcend even death. She followed him 3 months later, her body simply giving up without the presence of her beloved to sustain it, and they were buried together on a hill overlooking New Haven. Their grave became a pilgrimage site for young couples, both human and orc, who came to honor the memory of two people who had proved that love could bridge any divide. Keth, grown into a strong and thoughtful leader, stood at his parents' grave with his own mixed heritage family gathered around him. His children and grandchildren represented the future his parents had fought for, a future where the lines between human and orc were blurring, and where peace was the norm rather than the exception. "Thank you," he said quietly to the stones that marked where his parents rested. "Thank you for being brave enough to choose love. Thank you for giving me a world where I belong." The wind stirred the flowers that grew wild around the grave, and for a moment Keth could have sworn he heard his father's voice, warm and reassuring, telling him that everything was going to be all right. He smiled through his tears and gathered his family close, and together they walked back down the hill toward New Haven, toward home, toward the future that Garrett and Jorna had made possible through their courage and their love. And in the years that followed, as New Haven grew into a city, and the peace between humans and orcs solidified into something permanent and real, the story continued to be told. It became more than just history. It became a reminder of what was possible when people chose to see each other as individuals rather than enemies, when they chose compassion over hatred, and when they chose love over everything else. Garrett Rourke had found an orc mother shielding her baby in the ash, and he had vowed to get them both home alive. He had kept that vow against impossible odds, and in doing so, he had changed the world. Not through great battles or heroic speeches, but through simple human kindness and the recognition that every life had value, regardless of species or circumstance. It was a lesson the world desperately needed, and one that echoed down through the generations, carried forward by every couple who defied prejudice to love across the human divide, by every parent who taught their children that differences were to be celebrated rather than feared, and by every person who chose peace over war. The legacy of Garrett and Jorna lived on, not in monuments or official histories, but in the everyday choices of ordinary people trying to build a better world. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. Not the dramatic rescue or the romantic gesture, but the slow, steady accumulation of small acts of courage and compassion that eventually transformed an entire society. New Haven thrived, and the story of its founders was never forgotten, passed down from generation to generation as a reminder of where they had come from and what they had overcome. And though the world still had its problems and its conflicts, there was hope now, genuine hope that humans and orcs could find a way to live together in harmony. All because one man had looked at a dying orc mother and her infant son and seen not enemies, but people deserving of help and compassion. All because he had chosen to act on that recognition, regardless of the personal cost. All because he had loved without reservation or regret. That was the story of Garrett and Jorna Rourke, founders of New Haven and pioneers of peace between humans and orcs. It was a story of love conquering hatred, of courage in the face of impossible odds, and of the enduring power of simple human decency. And it was a story that would never be forgotten, as long as there were people who believed that a better world was possible and were willing to work toward making it real. The ash had settled long ago, covering the ruins of the old world, but from those ashes had grown something beautiful and new. A family, a town, a future built on the foundation of one man's vow and one woman's trust. And that was worth more than all the victories of all the wars that had come before, because it was a victory that would last, that would continue to ripple outward through time, touching lives and changing hearts for generations to come. Home. Garrett had promised to get them home alive. And he had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, creating a home not just for Jorna and Keth, but for countless others who came after them seeking refuge from a world torn by conflict. New Haven was that home, a place where species did not matter, where love was celebrated rather than condemned, and where peace was not just a dream but a daily reality. And so the story ended, as all good stories should, with hope and happiness and the promise of a better tomorrow. The characters had found their happy ending, earned through struggle and sacrifice, but worth every moment of hardship. Their love had not just survived, it had thrived, becoming the cornerstone of something greater than themselves. Garrett Rourke had kept his vow, and in doing so, he had shown the world what was possible when people chose to see past their differences and recognize the shared humanity in every living being. It was a lesson that would echo through the ages, a testament to the power of love and compassion to transform even the darkest of circumstances into something beautiful. And that was the end of their story, but also the beginning of something much larger, a legacy that would continue long after the last word was spoken and the final page was turned. Because some stories never really end. They just keep growing, touching new lives and inspiring new acts of courage, until the whole world is transformed by the simple truth that love, in all its forms, is always worth fighting for.